The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when the rumors started. Everyone in New York's high society whispered that Leona had been discarded, like last season's couture, left with nothing, fighting for nothing, disappearing into the night without a single scream. Her husband, the arrogant real estate tycoon Percy Ward, toasted his victory with champagne, his hand resting on the waist of a woman 10 years younger. He thought he had erased Leona from his life. He thought she was broken. He was wrong. The silence wasn't surrender. It was the calm before a storm that would shake the entire city to its foundations. The scratching of the fountain pen against the heavy bond paper was the only sound in the conference room on the 42nd floor of the World Trade Center. Outside, the grey Manhattan sky threatened rain, mirroring the atmosphere inside the glass-walled office of Moretti and Associates. Leona sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress, one she had bought off the rack 3 years ago. Across the mahogany table sat Percy Ward. He was checking his Rolex Daytona every 30 seconds, his leg bouncing with an impatient energy that radiated smugness. Beside him sat his shark of a lawyer, a man who charged $1,200 an hour to destroy lives. "Just sign on the dotted line, Leona," Percy said, his voice dripping with bored condescension. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You get the small apartment in Queens and the 2018 Honda. I keep the portfolio, the Hamptons estate, and the company shares. It's generous, considering you've contributed exactly 0 to the bottom line." Leona didn't look at him. She looked at the papers. The prenuptial agreement she had signed 5 years ago, blinded by love, had been airtight. But the settlement in front of her was even worse. It was an insult. It was a declaration that her 5 years of managing his household, nursing his sick mother until she passed, and organizing the networking events that built his reputation were worth nothing. "The apartment in Queens is in your name, but the mortgage isn't paid off," Leona said softly. It was the first time she had spoken in 20 minutes. Percy scoffed, leaning back in his leather chair. "It's equity, Leona. Be grateful. Most women in your position dumped, and skill-less would be on the street. I'm being a saint." He exchanged a look with his lawyer, a smirk playing on his lips. They expected her to cry. They expected her to beg, to scream, to make a scene that would validate Percy's narrative that she was unstable and clingy. That was the story he had already planted in the tabloids. The Post had run a blind item just yesterday about a prominent developer dealing with an estranged, hysterical wife. Leona picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. "Is this everything?" she asked. "Everything," Percy replied, checking his watch again. "I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin in 20 minutes. Sloane is waiting." Sloane. The name hung in the air like toxic gas. Sloane was 24, a brand ambassador for a vodka company, and had been seen on Percy's arm at the Met Gala, while Leona was at home, recovering from the miscarriage Percy had called inconvenient. Leona uncapped the pen. She didn't read the clauses again. She didn't ask for more alimony. She didn't mention the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that she knew about, the ones Percy thought were invisible. She simply signed, Leona Ward. Then she pushed the papers across the table. "I'm taking my maiden name back," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Effective immediately." Percy laughed, snatching the papers. "Leona Evans. Suit yourself. It doesn't carry quite the same weight, does it?" He stood up, buttoning his bespoke Italian suit jacket. "Good luck, Leona. Try not to starve." He walked out without looking back. His lawyer gave her a pitying nod before following him. Leona remained in the chair for a long moment. She looked out the window at the sprawling city below. She reached into her purse and pulled out a burner phone. She dialed a number she had memorized but never called. It rang once. "It's done," Leona said. I signed. "He thinks I'm gone." A deep, gravelly voice on the other end answered. "Good. The jet is fueled. We'll see you in Zurich tonight. The board is waiting." Leona hung up. She smoothed her skirt, and walked out of the office. She didn't go to the apartment in Queens. She took the elevator down, walked past the subway entrance, and stepped into a black sedan that had just pulled up to the curb. The license plate was diplomatic. 3 weeks later, the charity event of the season was the Goldman Sachs Winter Gala held at the Plaza Hotel. It was the kind of event where tickets cost $30,000 a plate, and the net worth in the room could purchase a small country. Percy Ward was in his element. He moved through the crowd with Sloane clinging to his bicep. Sloane was wearing a sheer diamond-encrusted gown that left little to the imagination, flashing a massive emerald engagement ring to anyone who made eye contact. "You look like a king, baby," Sloane whispered, nipping at his ear. "I feel like one," Percy replied, taking a sip of scotch. "The divorce is final next week. The stock is up 12% since the announcement. It's like the market was waiting for me to cut the dead weight." He spotted a group of investors near the ice sculpture and steered Sloane toward them. "Gentlemen," Percy greeted them, booming. "I hope you're ready to invest in the waterfront project. We break ground in June." One of the men, a heavy-set banker named Arthur Penhaligon, looked uncomfortable. "Percy, good to see you. We were just discussing the changes in management." Percy frowned. "Changes? I'm the CEO. There are no changes." "Not at Ward Developments, no," Arthur said, shifting his weight. "We're talking about the acquisition rumor. Someone is buying up the supply chain, steel, concrete, glass. All the major suppliers for the East Coast are being consolidated under a new holding company." Percy laughed dismissively. "Some European conglomerate, I'm sure. Won't affect us. I have contracts." "Contracts can be bought out." "Percy," another investor murmured. "And the rumor is this holding company is aggressive. They're called Aurelius Global." Percy waved his hand. "Never heard of them. Look, let's talk about something that matters. The gala auction. I plan to win that 1962 Ferrari." As Percy boasted, the room suddenly went quiet. The ambient chatter died down, replaced by a low, confused murmur. The music from the string quartet faltered and stopped. Heads turned toward the grand entrance of the ballroom. "What is going on?" Sloane complained, looking around. "Why is everyone stopping?" The massive double doors, usually kept closed for security, were swung wide open by two frantic-looking event coordinators. A hush fell over the crowd as the sound of rotor blades began to thump rhythmically outside. It wasn't the sound of a distant helicopter. It was close, deafeningly close. It sounded like it was landing right on Fifth Avenue. "Is that a helicopter?" Arthur asked, walking toward the terrace windows. The guests flocked to the windows. Down on the street, traffic had been completely halted by NYPD escorts, a sleek, matte black helicopter, bearing no logo, but the distinct design of a military-grade Sikorsky, usually reserved for heads of state, was touching down in the cleared intersection in front of the plaza. The wind from the rotors whipped the flags outside the hotel. "Who the hell is that?" Percy asked, annoyed that the attention had shifted away from him. "The president." "No," Arthur whispered, squinting. "That's a private bird. Custom. That's billionaire money, Percy. Real billionaire money. Not millionaire real estate developer money." The door of the helicopter slid open. A man stepped out to us, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like armor. He had salt and pepper hair and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He looked like a bodyguard, but he carried himself like a general. He extended a hand back into the cabin. A woman stepped out. From the distance of the ballroom balcony, it was hard to see her face clearly, but her silhouette was unmistakable. She wore a gown of liquid silver that seemed to catch the streetlights and amplify them. It was a dress that cost more than Percy's house. She moved with a grace that was predatory confident. "Who is she?" Sloane asked, her voice shrill with jealousy. The woman on the street didn't look up. She walked straight toward the red carpet entrance of the plaza, the mysterious man flanking her. Moments later, the ballroom doors swung open again. The master of ceremonies, a man usually composed, looked flustered as he stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice wavered slightly, "please welcome the new majority shareholder of the Goldman Sachs Philanthropic Board and the CEO of Aurelius Global." Percy rolled his eyes. Finally. Let's see who this old geezer is. The woman in the silver dress stepped into the light of the ballroom. The room gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of 300 people losing their breath at once. Percy dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, scotch splashing onto Sloane's shoes. Sloane shrieked, "My Jimmy Choos!" But Percy didn't hear her. He couldn't hear anything over the roaring in his ears. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the crowd with eyes as cold as the North Atlantic, was Leona. But it wasn't the Leona who wore 3-year-old dresses and drove a Honda. Her hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob that framed her face. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting cheekbones Percy hadn't realized she had. And around her neck sat a necklace of blue diamonds that Percy recognized from a Forbes article he had read years ago, the Star of Bombay. She wasn't just beautiful. She was terrifying. The man from the helicopter stood one step behind her. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear. She smiled a small, dangerous smile that didn't reach her eyes. She began to descend the stairs. Every eye followed her. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. She walked straight toward the center of the room, toward the group of investors where Percy stood, paralyzed. Arthur Penhaligon was the first to recover. He stepped forward, his face pale. "Leona, is that—" "You." Leona stopped. She looked at Arthur, then slowly turned her gaze to Percy. "Hello, Percy," she said. Her voice was smooth-cultured and carried a power he had never heard before. "I believe you're standing in my spot." "You—" Percy stammered, his face flushing red. "What is this? What are you doing here? You weren't invited. Security." He looked around for a guard, but the security team was standing at attention, looking at Leona with deference. "Actually," Leona said, taking a glass of champagne from a passing waiter who bowed his head to her, "I own the venue for the evening. I just bought the hotel's event management subsidiary this morning." She took a sip, her eyes locking onto Sloane, who was trembling with a mix of rage and confusion. "Cute dress, Sloane," Leona said, her tone dripping with faux sweetness. "It looks very affordable." She turned back to Percy. "We have business to discuss, husband. Or should I say, ex-husband. I hope you brought your checkbook. Although looking at your current stock portfolio—" She paused, glancing at the man behind her. "Dominic, what did the Ward Development stock do in the last hour?" The man named Dominic checked a tablet in his hand. "It dropped 40%, ma'am. The suppliers halted all shipments to his sites as of 8 p.m. Percy felt his knees go weak. "What, you? You stopped my shipments?" "I own the suppliers now, Percy," Leona said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Remember when you told me I contributed 0 to the bottom line? I decided to show you what 0 really looks like." The silence that followed Leona's declaration at the Plaza Hotel was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes an execution. Percy Ward, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar skyscrapers and bullied city councils into submission, stood with his mouth slightly ajar, resembling a fish pulled from water. The champagne dripping from the shattered glass on the floor was the only thing moving. "You're lying," Percy finally choked out, though his voice lacked its usual booming resonance. He looked around the room seeking allies, but the herd mentality of New York's elite was swift and brutal. They smelled blood, and for the first time in a decade, the blood wasn't Leona's, it was his. Arthur Penhaligon, the banker who had been so eager to shake Percy's hand 5 minutes ago, took a subtle half-step away from him. "Leona," Percy hissed, stepping forward, his face contorted with a mix of confusion and malice. "You expect anyone to believe this charade? You're a failed interior decorator. You're a housewife who couldn't even keep a pregnancy. You're renting a helicopter to embarrass me." He reached out to grab her arm, his fingers curling into a claw. "Stop this nonsense," and he never made contact. Dominic moved with a speed that defied his size. In one fluid motion, he intercepted Percy's wrist. There was a sickening crack, not a break, but the sound of ligaments being tested to their absolute limit. Percy yelped, dropping to one knee. "Touch her again," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble, like grinding gears. "And I will dismantle you, physically. The financial dismantling comes later." "Let him go, Dominic," Leona said softly. She hadn't flinched. She looked down at her ex-husband, her eyes devoid of the warmth he used to manipulate. "He's not worth the assault charge. Besides, he needs his hands to sign the bankruptcy filings." Dominic released him. Percy stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his face turning a deep shade of crimson as he realized 300 smartphones were recording the interaction. The flashbulbs were blinding. #LeonaRevenge was already trending on Twitter. Sloane, realizing the tide had turned, tried to salvage the situation. She stepped forward, tossing her hair. "You think you're so special. Because you rented a dress, Percy is the king of New York real estate. You're just a bitter ex." Leona laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. "The King Sloane honey, he's a tenant, and his lease is up." Leona turned to the crowd. "Enjoy the evening, everyone. The bar is open, and Aurelius Global is covering the tab. Drink the good stuff. I know Percy never let you." She turned on her heel, her silver gown flowing like mercury, and walked back towards the terrace doors. Dominic flanked her, a human shield against the chaos. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the wind from the idling helicopter whipped Leona's hair. She didn't look back at the ballroom. She climbed into the cabin, sinking into the cream leather seat. "To the penthouse, ma'am?" the pilot asked. "Yes," Leona replied, accepting a glass of water from Dominic. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally releasing 5 years of suppressed rage. As the helicopter lifted off, soaring above the gridlock of Fifth Avenue, Leona looked down at the city. From up here, the people looked like ants. Percy looked like an ant. "Did the legal team file the injunctions?" she asked Dominic. "Filed at 9:01 p.m. Dominic confirmed, checking his encrypted tablet. "We froze his personal accounts, the joint assets he tried to hide in the shell company, and we've served a cease and desist to his construction crews on the waterfront project. They walked off the job 20 minutes ago." Leona nodded, closing her eyes. "He called me a failed interior decorator," she whispered. "He doesn't know who you are," Dominic said gently. He never bothered to ask. That was the tragedy of it. Percy Ward had fallen in love with Leona's face and her subservience. He had never asked about her family. He had assumed that because she was quiet and modest, she came from nothing. He didn't know that Leona Evans was a shortened version of her name. She was Leona Evans Wolfe. Her grandfather was Conrad Wolfe. The name was spoken in hushed tones in the corridors of power in London, Zurich, and Hong Kong. Conrad Wolfe wasn't just a billionaire. He was an institution. He had made his fortune in shipping and rare earth metals during the Cold War. He was a man who toppled governments to secure trade routes. When Leona was 22, she had walked away from the Wolfe empire. She wanted to be loved for herself, not her trust fund. She wanted a simple life. She met Percy, a charming, ambitious upstart, and thought she had found it. She hid her identity, using her mother's maiden name. When Conrad died 2 years ago, while Leona was nursing Percy's dying mother, he left everything to his only granddaughter. But there was a condition in the will, a test of character. Leona had to remain in her current marital situation for 2 more years without accessing the funds to prove she could endure hardship without using the Wolfe crutch. She had endured. She had cooked, cleaned, and suffered Percy's emotional abuse. She had grieved her miscarriage alone because Percy was too busy closing a deal. Yesterday the condition on the will had expired. Today she was the sole owner of the Wolfe fortune valued at $42 billion. "Dominic," Leona said, opening her eyes as the lights of the Chrysler building passed by. "Get me the file on the Blackwood accounts." Dominic paused. "The illegal ones? The bribes he paid to the zoning commissioner?" "Yes," Leona said. "I'm not just taking his money, I'm taking his freedom." The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Ward Development's tower, but inside the mood was darker than midnight. Percy Ward stormed out of the elevator on the 40th floor, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. He was wearing the same tuxedo trousers from the night before, paired with a wrinkled dress shirt. His eyes were bloodshot. "Where is everyone?" he screamed into the open plan office. Usually at 8 a.m., the floor was buzzing with analysts, architects, and sales teams. Today it was a ghost town. Phones were ringing off the hook unanswered. His personal assistant, a young woman named Sarah, who usually greeted him with coffee, was packing a box at her desk. "Sarah, why isn't there coffee? And why is the trading floor empty?" Percy barked, marching toward her. Sarah didn't look up. She dropped a framed photo of her cat into the box. "I quit, Mr. Ward." "You can't quit. We have the waterfront crisis to manage. Get me." Arthur Penhaligon on the phone immediately. "Arthur won't take your call," Sarah said, picking up her box. "No one will. And the staff didn't come in because payroll bounced this morning." Percy froze. "That's impossible. I transferred $2 million into the operational account yesterday." "The bank froze it," Sarah said, finally looking at him. Her eyes held no pity, only exhaustion. "Security is escorting people out. I'd suggest you leave too before the new management arrives." "New management? I am the management!" Percy roared. The elevator doors chimed behind him. Percy spun around, expecting security. Instead, he saw a phalanx of suits. 6 lawyers carrying briefcases marched out in a V formation. In the center of them walked a man Percy recognized with a jolt of terror. It was frantic panic. The man was Simon Calloway, the Viper of Wall Street, the most expensive corporate litigator in America. He only represented Fortune 10 companies. And walking next to Simon, looking fresh and sharp in a white Chanel power suit, was Leona. She didn't look like the woman who used to beg him to come home for dinner. She looked like a shark-smelling chum. "Get out of my office," Percy snarled, though he backed up until his legs hit Sarah's desk. "Mr. Ward." Simon Calloway spoke first. His voice was smooth, cultured, and deadly. "As of 6 a.m. this morning, Aurelius Global has acquired 51% of the outstanding debt obligations of war developments. Since you have defaulted on 3 covenant clauses regarding liquidity, we have exercised our right to accelerate the debt." "Speak English," Percy shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. Leona stepped forward. She placed a manicured hand on the receptionist's desk. "It means I own the building, Percy," she said calmly. "And the furniture, and the computers, and the coffee machine you're so desperate for." You bought my debt," Percy whispered. The reality was crashing down on him. The debt he had leveraged to build his empire, hundreds of millions in loans, was now in the hands of his ex-wife. "I bought it for 60 cents on the dollar," Leona corrected him. "The banks were quite eager to unload it once I showed them the forensic accounting of your offshore shell companies." Percy turned pale. "You don't have access to that. That's confidential." "Nothing is confidential when you're the wife who balanced the books while you were out cheating," Leona said. She walked past him, heading toward his office, the corner office, with the view of the harbor. "Hey, you can't go in there!" Percy lunged after her. 2 large security guards, Aurelius Security. Not the building's usual rent-a-cops, stepped in his path. They were built like linebackers. Percy bounced off them. Leona walked into the office, her office now. She looked around. It smelled of stale cigars and Percy's expensive cologne. She walked to the desk, picked up the crystal nameplate that read, "Percy Ward, CEO," and dropped it into the trash can. The sound of the heavy crystal hitting the metal bin rang out like a gunshot. She sat down in the leather chair. It was comfortable. Percy stood in the doorway, held back by the guards, panting. "Leona, please, let's talk. We can work this out. You want money? I can get you money. We can restructure." "I don't want your money, Percy," Leona said, leaning back and lacing her fingers together. "I have more money in my couch cushions than you have in your entire portfolio." She gestured to the lawyers. Simon explained the next phase. Simon Calloway opened a blue folder. "Mr. Ward, we are initiating a forensic audit of the waterfront project. We have evidence suggesting that you used substandard steel, specifically grade 4 rebar, instead of the mandated grade 60, and pocketed the difference." Percy's knees gave out. He slid down the doorframe. If they proved that it wasn't just bankruptcy, it was fraud. It was prison. That's a lie," he stammered. "Is it?" Leona asked. "I remember a dinner 2 years ago. You were bragging to your friend Caleb about how much you saved on materials. You thought I wasn't listening. You thought I was just the stupid wife pouring the wine." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. "I was listening to every word, Percy. I wrote it all down. Dates, times, names of the suppliers." She turned back to him. The look in her eyes was almost sad. "You destroyed our marriage for a 24-year-old who can't spell fidelity. But I'm destroying your life because you are a criminal who puts people's safety at risk for profit. This isn't divorce. This is a clean-up operation." Just then, Leona's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a text from Dominic. Attachment security footage. Penthouse. Leona tapped the screen. The video feed showed Sloane Percy's mistress currently in Percy's penthouse apartment. She wasn't crying over his downfall. She was frantically stuffing jewelry watches and stacks of cash from the safe into a Louis Vuitton duffel bag. Leona smiled and turned the phone screen toward Percy. "Look on the bright side, Percy," she said. "At least Sloane is showing some initiative. Though I should probably tell you. I changed the codes to the elevator 5 minutes ago. She's trapped in the lobby. The police are on their way." Percy stared at the screen, watching the woman he had sacrificed everything for looting his home like a common thief. "Why?" Percy whispered, tears finally spilling over. "Why are you doing this?" Leona walked over to him, squatting down so she was eye level. "Because," she whispered, her voice hard as diamond, "you mistook my silence for weakness. You thought you could throw me away, but you forgot the most important rule of business, Percy." "What rule?" "Never sign a contract you haven't read," she said, "and never ever underestimate the woman who knows where the bodies are buried." She stood up and looked at the guards. "Escort Mr. Ward out of the building, and make sure he takes the stairs. The elevators are for employees." As Percy was dragged away, kicking and screaming, Leona turned back to the room full of lawyers. "Now," she said, her voice shifting back to professional cool. "Let's talk about the acquisition of Harrington Steel. I want to buy them out by lunch." The holding cell at the 19th Precinct in Manhattan smelled of stale urine and industrial cleaner. It was a far cry from the cedar and leather scent of Percy Ward's penthouse. Percy sat on a steel bench, his tuxedo shirt unbuttoned, his expensive Italian loafers scuffed. He had been there for 6 hours. No one had offered him coffee. When he asked for water, a tired officer had pointed to a fountain that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Giuliani administration. The door buzzed open. Percy jumped up, straightening his jacket. "Finally," he snapped. "Where is my lawyer? I demanded Simon Calloway." A detective walked in, followed by a woman in a sharp grey suit. She wasn't Simon Calloway. She was Assistant United States Attorney Joyce Kim from the Southern District of New York. "Mr. Calloway isn't coming, Mr. Ward," Joyce said, placing a thick file on the metal table. "In fact, Mr. Calloway is currently representing the plaintiff in the civil suit against you. Conflict of interest." Percy's mouth went dry. "Plaintiff, what civil suit?" "The class action lawsuit filed by the tenants of the waterfront project," Joyce said, sitting down. "But that's the least of your worries. I'm here for the federal charges." She opened the file. "Wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and thanks to a very cooperative witness, conspiracy to commit arson." Percy blinked. "Arson? I never—" "The warehouse fire in New Jersey last year." Joyce interrupted. "The one that destroyed the shipment of defective steel you were trying to hide from the inspectors. Insurance paid out $12 million. We know you paid a man named Tiny to light the match." "That's insane," Percy sputtered. "You have no proof. It's my word against some thugs." Joyce smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. She reached into the file and pulled out a transcript. "It's not Tiny's word we're relying on, Percy. It's Sloane's." Percy felt the blood drain from his face. "Sloane, my fiancé." "Your fiancé was detained, leaving your penthouse with $300,000 in undeclared cash and a bag full of Cartier jewelry," Joyce explained. When we explained that she was looking at 5 to 10 years for being an accomplice to money laundering, she became very talkative. She gave us the burner phones, Percy. She gave us the passwords to the cloud server where you kept the real ledgers. She even told us about the bribes to the zoning board. Percy slumped back against the cold wall. Sloane. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for. The woman he had bought a Bentley for. She hadn't lasted 6 hours in interrogation before selling him out. "I want a deal," Percy whispered. "No deals," Joyce said, closing the file. "The evidence was handed to us on a silver platter by Aurelius Global. They did our job for us. You're going away for a long time, Percy. Maybe in 20 years when you get out, you can try to get a job at a coffee shop, if they're hiring felons." Meanwhile, 40 stories above Central Park, Leona stood on the balcony of the penthouse that used to be Percy's. Now it was stripped bare. The gaudy modern art was gone. The furniture was covered in white sheets. Dominic stood in the doorway watching her. "The district attorney just called," Dominic said. "Percy was denied bail, flight risk, And Sloane entered a plea bargain. She's agreed to testify. Leona nodded, sipping a cup of herbal tea. She felt light. The weight that had been crushing her chest for 5 years was gone. "What about the house in the Hamptons?" she asked. "Secured," Dominic replied. "We evicted the tenants Percy was renting it to. The security team is doing a sweep now. You can fly out there tonight." Leona turned to look at him. "And the Wolf accounts? Did we secure the legacy funds?" Dominic hesitated. His usually stoic face showed a flicker of concern. "We secured the majority," he said carefully. "But there's an anomaly. When we audited the Cayman accounts, we found a transfer history we didn't expect. Percy wasn't just hiding money. He was paying someone." Leona frowned. "Paying who? A blackmailer?" "No," Dominic said. "It looks like protection money, or a debt payment. $50,000 a month every month to a shell company called Vanguard Holdings." "Vanguard," Leona repeated. The name triggered a memory, a distant, unpleasant memory from her grandfather's time. "Who owns Vanguard?" "We're tracing it," Dominic said. "But the routing numbers go through Zurich. It's high level. Whoever Percy was paying, they're powerful. And now that Percy is in jail and the payments have stopped, they'll come looking for the source," Leona finished. She set her tea down. The victory over Percy felt suddenly small. Percy was a fool, a greedy amateur. But if he was paying someone 50 grand a month, he was involved with professionals. "Get the jet ready," Leona said. "We're going to Zurich. If there's a leak in my grandfather's empire, I need to plug it before it sinks the ship. The Bohr-Olac Hotel in Zurich is where the old money sleeps. It's quiet, discreet, and smells of old pine and money." Leona sat in a private booth in the hotel's bar, wearing a black turtleneck and oversized sunglasses. She looked like a movie star trying to be invisible. Dominic sat at the bar, nursing a sparkling water, his eyes scanning the room. Across from Leona sat a small, nervous man named Herr Gunther. He was a banker at Credit Suisse, a man who had managed the Wolf family trust for decades. "You shouldn't have come, Fräulein Wolf," Gunther whispered, wiping sweat from his upper lip with a handkerchief. "It is not safe." "Cut the melodrama, Gunther," Leona said, her voice low. "My ex-husband was paying Vanguard Holdings. I traced the ownership to a blind trust managed by your bank. I want a name." Gunther looked around nervously. "I cannot. Client confidentiality is." "Confidentiality ends when my money is being siphoned," Leona snapped. She slid a piece of paper across the table. "I own the bank's majority debt as of this morning. I can have you fired and blacklisted from every financial institution in Europe by lunchtime. Give me the name." Gunther looked at the paper. His hands trembled. He leaned in close. "It is Roman Goderic." Leona froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Roman Goderic, the shipping magnate, the Iron Duke of the Mediterranean. He was her grandfather, Conrad's oldest enemy. 30 years ago, Conrad had destroyed Roman's father in a hostile takeover that left the Goderic family penniless. Roman had clawed his way back up from nothing, building a mercenary fleet that operated in the grey zones of international law. "Goderic," Leona whispered. "Why was Percy paying him?" "He wasn't paying him." A deep, smooth voice answered from behind her. "He was repaying a loan." Leona stiffened. She didn't turn around immediately. She signaled Dominic with a subtle tap on the table. She slowly turned in her seat. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Roman Goderic was in his late 50s, but he had the vitality of a man half his age. He wore a bespoke Savile Row suit that cost more than most cars. His eyes were a pale, icy blue. "Hello, Leona," Roman said, smiling. It was the smile of a predator looking at a wounded gazelle. Or should I say, Mrs. Ward. Oh, wait, I heard about the divorce. Messy business. Dominic was at Leona's side in a second, his hand hovering near his jacket pocket. "Back off," Dominic warned. Roman chuckled. "Relax, bodyguard. I'm just here to pay my respects to Conrad's granddaughter. I haven't seen you since you were a little girl with pigtails running around the estate." He pulled up a chair and sat down without asking. Gunter the banker practically ran out of the room. "You were funding Percy," Leona stated, her voice steady. "Funding, no. I was enabling," Roman corrected. "I met Percy 3 years ago. Desperate, greedy, stupid. The perfect vessel. I lent him the capital to expand his little real estate empire. High interest, of course. And in exchange he gave me something I wanted." "What?" Leona asked. "Information," Roman said. "Access to the Wolf shipping manifests. Routes, schedules, security protocols." Leona felt a cold knot in her stomach. "You've been using my company's logistics to move your contraband." "Among other things," Roman shrugged. "Percy was a useful idiot. But now you've gone and put him in jail and you've frozen the accounts. That's very inconvenient for me, Leona." He leaned forward. The playful veneer vanished. His face became a mask of cold menace. "Here is the situation. You're going to unfreeze the Vanguard accounts. You are going to sign over the shipping routes in the South China Sea to my holding company, and you are going to do it quietly." "And if I don't," Leona challenged, lifting her chin. "Then I release the files Percy gave me," Roman said softly. "Not about business? About your grandfather?" Leona frowned. "My grandfather is dead. You can't hurt him." "No," Roman agreed. "But I can destroy his legacy. I have proof, Leona. Proof that the foundation of the Wolf fortune wasn't just shrewd business. It was built on, let's call it, war crimes in the Congo in the 1960s. Documents, photos. If I release them, the Wolf name becomes toxic. Your assets will be frozen by the UN. Your company will be sanctioned into oblivion. You will be the queen of a graveyard." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "You have 24 hours. I'll be at my chalet in St. Moritz. Don't make me wait." He walked away, his footsteps echoing on the parquet floor. Leona sat in silence for a long time. "Dominic," she finally said. "Yes, ma'am. Is it true about the Congo?" Dominic looked away. That was answer enough. Conrad Wolf had been a ruthless man in a brutal time. "We can't let him blackmail you," Dominic said. "If we give him the roots, he'll just ask for more next month." "I know," Leona said. She stood up, her face hardening. She was done being the victim. She was done being the quiet wife. She was a wolf. "He wants a war," she said, putting on her sunglasses. "Let's give him one. But we're not fighting him in the boardroom." "Where are we going?" Dominic asked. "To the archives," Leona said. "If my grandfather was a monster, he would have kept insurance. We need to find the skeletons in Roman's closet before he exposes ours." The Wolf estate in the Swiss Alps was a fortress. Nestled against the side of a mountain, it was accessible only by a private funicular train or helicopter. It was where Conrad Wolf had spent his final years. Leona and Dominic arrived by helicopter in a blinding snowstorm. The wind howled like a banshee, shaking the windows of the ancient stone library, where Leona now sat, surrounded by boxes of old files. "We have 12 hours left," Dominic said, pacing the room. "Roman's lawyers are already drafting the transfer agreements." Leona was reading a faded leather-bound journal. It was her grandfather's diary. "He was paranoid," Leona murmured. He recorded everything, every bribe, every handshake. She flipped a page and stopped. Her finger traced a name. Goderic. Dominic, look at this. Dominic leaned over. The entry was dated 1985. Roman came to me today, begging. His father left him nothing but debt. He wanted a start. I gave him the first ship, but I made him sign the collateral. Collateral? Dominic asked. What collateral? Leona read on. Her eyes widened. Roman didn't build his empire from scratch, she whispered. He built it on a lie. He's not the owner of Goderic Shipping. He's a proxy. A proxy for who? For me, Leona said, looking up. Or rather for the Wolf estate. My grandfather technically owns Roman's entire fleet. He held the deed in a blind trust as insurance to keep Roman under control. It was never dissolved. Leona stood up, adrenaline rushing through her veins. Roman thinks he has leverage on me because of the Congo allegations. But if I trigger this clause from 1985, I can seize his entire fleet. He won't just be broke, he'll be destitute. But where is the deed? Dominic asked. It has to be the physical copy. Leona looked at the fireplace. Above the mantel hung a massive, ugly oil painting of a storm at sea. Her grandfather had hated art, but he loved that painting. He never let anyone touch it. The storm, Leona said. He always said the safest place to be is in the eye of the storm. She walked to the painting. She felt along the heavy gold frame. There was a small latch behind the bottom corner. Click. The frame swung open. Behind the canvas was a wall safe. Do you know the combination? Dominic asked. It's my birthday, Leona said. He always said I was his greatest investment. She spun the dial. Right to 10, left to 24, right to 88. The heavy steel door creaked open. Inside sat a single yellow envelope sealed with wax. Leona grabbed it. She tore it open. It was the deed, the original incorporation papers of Roman's company, signed by Roman Goderic, listing Conrad Wolf as the 100% beneficiary. We have him. Leona breathed. Suddenly the lights in the library flickered and died. The room was plunged into darkness. Dominic! Leona called out. Get down! Dominic shouted. Crash! The massive stained glass window shattered inward. Snow and wind blasted into the room, followed by 3 figures in tactical gear rappelling from the roof. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to erase the evidence. Secure the document, Dominic roared, tackling the first intruder. Leona scrambled backward, clutching the envelope to her chest. She ducked behind the heavy oak desk just as a suppressor-equipped gunshot thwipped into the wood where her head had been a second ago. Dominic was a blur of motion. He disarmed the first man with a brutal elbow strike, sending the rifle skittering across the floor. But there were 2 more. One of the men lunged for Leona, vaulting over the desk. He was huge, his face covered by a balaclava. Leona didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She remembered the self-defense classes she had taken secretly, while Percy was at his business dinners. As the man reached for her, she grabbed a heavy brass letter opener from the desk and drove it into his thigh. The man howled, stumbling back. It gave Dominic enough time. He finished the second attacker and threw a heavy bust of Julius Caesar at the man attacking Leona. It connected with a sickening thud. The man went down. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the howling wind and Dominic's heavy breathing. Are you hurt? Dominic asked, rushing to her side. I'm fine, Leona said, standing up. She was shaking, but she held the envelope tight. They came for the deed. Roman knew. He bugged the room, Dominic realized, scanning the bookshelves. He reached behind a row of encyclopedias and pulled out a tiny listening device. He heard us find it. Leona looked at the unconscious men on the floor. He's desperate. He knows this is the end for him. She walked to the shattered window. The storm was raging outside. "He's at his chalet in St. Moritz?" Leona asked. "Yes," Dominic said, checking the pulse of one of the intruders. "About 20 miles from here." "Get the helicopter pilot," Leona commanded. "We're not waiting for morning. We're going to pay Roman a visit. Tonight." "In this weather?" Dominic asked. "It's suicide." Leona looked at the deed in her hand. Her eyes were cold harder than the ice on the mountain. "Percy thought I was weak. Roman thinks I'm a scared little girl. I'm going to show them exactly who I am." She turned to Dominic. "I am the storm." The blizzard over St. Moritz was a white wall of death. The helicopter shook violently, the rotors screaming against the wind as the pilot fought to keep the bird in the air. "We can't land," the pilot yelled over the headset. "Visibility is 0. The wind shear will slam us into the mountain." "Land it," Leona ordered from the back. Her voice was calm, cutting through the static. She clutched the yellow envelope against her chest. "Put it down on the lawn. I don't care if you strip the landing gear." Dominic looked at her. In the flashing strobe lights of the cabin, she looked terrified, but her jaw was set in stone. She wasn't the woman who had cried over a broken plate 3 years ago. She was a warrior heading into battle. With a sickening lurch, the helicopter dropped. The skids slammed into the deep snow of the chalet's front lawn, jarring Leona's teeth. The engine whined down, defeated by the cold. "Stay here," Dominic told the pilot. He drew his sidearm, checked the chamber, and opened the door. The wind hit them like a physical blow. Leona stepped out into the knee-deep snow, her high heels useless, her dress shoes soaking instantly. She didn't feel the cold. She felt only the fire of rage. They marched toward the massive wooden doors of Roman Godric's chalet. 2 guards stood outside, huddled against the cold. They reached for their weapons when they saw Dominic, but he was faster. 2 precise shots to the shoulders, non-lethal but incapacitating, dropped them into the snow. Leona didn't break stride. She walked up the steps and kicked the heavy oak door open. Inside the chalet was warm smelling of pine and expensive brandy. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth. Roman Godrich was standing by the fire, a crystal glass in his hand. He turned around expecting his hitmen to return with news of their success. Instead, he saw a snow-covered, shivering, furious Leona. And behind her, a very dangerous-looking Dominic. Roman's glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the stone hearth, the amber liquid hissing as it hit the fire. "You," Roman whispered, "you should be dead." "I'm hard to kill," Leona said, stepping into the room. Snow melted off her coat, dripping onto the Persian rug. "And so is the truth." "My men," Roman stammered, looking past her. "Your men are currently tied up in my grandfather's library," Leona said. "And the Swiss police are on their way to pick them up. Attempted murder, international espionage, trespassing." Roman laughed nervously, trying to regain his composure. "You have no proof I sent them. They are mercenaries. I'll deny everything. And I still have the files on your grandfather, the Congo Leona. Remember?" "I remember," Leona said. She walked to the heavy wooden table in the center of the room and threw the yellow envelope down. It landed with a heavy slap. "Read it." Roman looked at the envelope. He looked at Leona. Slowly, he reached out and opened it. As he read the document, the original incorporation papers, the deed of trust, the collateral agreement signed in 1985, his face went from pale to grey. This is a forgery," he rasped. "It's notarized by the Bank of Zurich," Leona said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't own Goderic Shipping, Roman. You never did. You were a caretaker, a glorified employee. My grandfather owned 100% of the voting stock as collateral for the loan he gave your father. She leaned over the table, her eyes locking onto his. The loan was never repaid. The collateral clause was never voided, which means I own your ships, I own your house, I own the shirt on your back. Roman collapsed into a chair. He looked old suddenly. The vitality was gone. The Iron Duke was just an old man with nothing. The Congo files, he whispered weakly. I'll release them. I'll burn your name to the ground. Go ahead, Leona said. My grandfather is dead. He can't be hurt. And the company we've already rebranded. Aurelius Global is separating from the legacy logistics arm. The market has already priced in the rumors. We'll take a hit, sure. But we'll survive. She pointed a finger at him. But you, if I enforce this deed, you are bankrupt. And since you used company assets to fund illegal smuggling, you're also liable for corporate malfeasance. You'll go to prison, Roman. Not a nice Swiss prison. A federal one. Roman looked up, tears of frustration in his eyes. What do you want? I want you gone, Leona said. You will sign over full control of the fleet immediately. You will confess to the smuggling operation, taking sole responsibility, and clear Aurelius Global of any involvement. In exchange, I won't press charges for the attempted murder tonight. You can retire to a small island somewhere and rot. Roman looked at the document. He looked at Dominic, who was still holding his gun. He looked at the fire. He picked up a pen. His hand shook as he signed the surrender. Leona took the paper. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just felt tired. Get out of my house, she said. Roman stood up, broken. He walked past her, out into the storm, without a coat. Leona sank into the chair he had vacated. She looked at the fire. It's over, Dominic said softly, holstering his weapon. No, Leona said, watching the flames. The cleanup is just beginning. 6 months later. The courtroom in New York was packed. Reporters jockeyed for position. Sketch artists sharpened their pencils. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Harrison entered the room. Percy Ward stood up. He looked gaunt. His hair was thinning. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by a twitchy nervousness. Next to him, his public defender, a young man who looked like he'd graduated law school yesterday, shuffled papers nervously. Mr. Ward, Judge Harrison said, looking over his spectacles. You have been found guilty on 14 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, and conspiracy to commit arson. Your testimony regarding Ms. Sloane Miller was noted, but her cooperation with the state was far more illuminating. Percy looked back at the gallery. He saw Sloane sitting there. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her phone. She had taken a plea deal, 2 years probation in exchange for burying Percy. Then Percy saw her. Sitting in the back row wearing a simple white suit was Leona. She looked radiant, powerful, unreachable. Percy Ward, the judge's voice boomed. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 10. You are also ordered to pay restitution of $42 million to the victims of the waterfront project fraud. The gavel banged. Crack. Percy's legs gave out. As the marshals grabbed his arms to drag him away, he screamed, Leona, Leona, please, I'm sorry, I love you. Leona didn't flinch. She watched him being dragged through the door. She felt nothing. No joy. No sadness. Just closure. She stood up and walked out of the courtroom. The reporters swarmed her. Ms. Wolfe, how do you feel seeing your ex-husband sentenced? Ms. Wolfe, is it true you're donating the entire settlement from the divorce to the waterfront victims? Leona stopped on the steps of the courthouse. She put on her sunglasses. Justice was served, she said simply. And yes, every penny Percy stole will be returned to the families he hurt. Aurelius Global is about building the future, not stealing from it. She walked down the steps to the waiting limousine. Dominic opened the door for her. "Where to, Mom?" the driver asked. Leona looked at Dominic. For the first time in 6 months, she smiled a real smile. "The airport," she said. "I hear Paris is beautiful this time of year. And I have a date." "A date, Mom?" Dominic asked, raising an eyebrow as he got in beside her. "With whom?" Leona took his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. "With my head of security," she whispered. "If he's free." Dominic squeezed her hand. "He's free." As the car pulled away, merging into the traffic of the city she now owned, Leona looked out the window. She had signed the divorce quietly. She had suffered in silence. But she had emerged as the queen, and the world finally knew her name. What an incredible journey! From a silenced housewife to a global power player, Leona proved that the best revenge isn't just success, it's total domination. Percy got his 15 years behind bars, Sloane turned traitor, and Roman Goderich was left out in the cold. But the best part, Leona found someone who actually respects her strength in Dominic. Question for you. Do you think 15 years was enough for Percy? Or did he deserve more for trying to burn down a warehouse? Let me know in the comments. If you loved this story of betrayal, revenge and justice, please smash that. Like button, it really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. We release new drama every week. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.